Sorry, I'm just getting my lens set up a little bit here. How's that for exposure? It looks a little bit dark. Let's go f2.2. Let me refocus on my noggin here. Okay, that looks pretty good to me right there. And hopefully my audio is good. So before we get into everything that we're here for, my drums are echoing over there. I forgot. You know, it's funny. I schedule these live streams and yet I still just end up running around like a madman before the live stream starts, trying to get everything copacetic for it. So yeah, new year, new gear, King Crux says. And it's good to see you here, bud. I hope you had a great holiday. And I wanted to come on and first off to just get the ball rolling for the new year, because this past few months of 2023, I have been pretty burned out on YouTube, and burnout is something that's real. It's something that's real, and it's something that I think us as creators and just YouTubers in general don't really talk enough about, but it's a real thing. And it kind of happened to me, and it's kind of some of it has to do with imposter syndrome too. So if any of you know what imposter syndrome is, that's a real thing too. It's where, okay, I have my perspective on this type of stuff that I talk about on this channel, on the cameras, on the real estate photography and videography and so on and so forth. But is that really anything that hasn't been talked about before? And so I'll get an idea for a video and I'll think it's a good idea. And I have my perspective on whichever subject it is, but then almost immediately afterwards, I think to myself, but hasn't this been just said ad nauseum on YouTube by a million different other creators? This looks a little bright, doesn't it? I'm gonna go 2.8. Let me know how that looks. Let's see. Okay, nice setup. Thanks, King Craig. Okay, so let's talk about that. Before we get into the camera predictions, which I do have some pretty big predictions about cameras and stuff coming up here. I wonder if that's doing that on the screen as I do it. I think my software changed too. So all kinds of stuff changes if I don't do this that often, right? Okay, so the biggest difference in the setup that I have right now, a lot of this gear that I've used before, the biggest difference is this microphone. It is a Electrovoice RE20. And I hadn't really planned on using this microphone, but this was actually a gift from a good friend of mine for Christmas. So that's just awesome. Like, I had no idea that he was going to send it to me or want to send it to me, but he did. And I am so stoked because Electrovoice RE20s are awesome microphones. A lot of people use them for this type of thing like we're doing right now, spoken word. A lot of broadcast studios use them and such, but I probably prefer the sound of my AEA KU5A, my hypercardioid ribbon that I'm usually using close miking like this to this. But I will say, though, that these make excellent, I'm a drummer too, and these make awesome kick drum microphones. So that's probably how I'm going to use this going forward. But I wanted to kind of put it through its paces. It's so awesome that my buddy sent me this as a Christmas gift. And I've listened to it a little bit. I kind of don't like the high end of it. And I might continue to use it. I might continue to use it and tweak it. So we'll see. The rest of the setup here is the red Komodo-X and the Sigma 18 to 35 1.8. I call it La Cucaracha because everybody has one. And I've got two Amaran RGB mats, the 2x2 RGB mats as a key light and as a fill light. And then I have kind of a light. I've got a Aputure 300D Mark II, just kind of bringing the room up over there. So, and the audio is being run and processed through the DBX 286 channel strip, then going straight into the red Komodo-X and coming over like that. So I see a little bit of a lag on the screen. I don't know if that's the Komodo-X that's delaying the signal or, what part of the chain that is. That has happened, I think, with the Komodo before. So my apologies if my lips are moving a little bit differently than the sound is syncing up. There's not a whole lot I can do about that at the moment. So let's see. Tell me if it sounds good, though. I mean, if you enjoy the sound of it. So Keith, what's happening? C as in Seattle, or C as in yes. I don't know. Maybe it's Seattle yes. You're a Seattle fan. Sorry about your luck recently. I'm just kidding. So I'm only loosely following football this season. I have had years where I've played fantasy, and it's like I don't even know who any of these guys are anymore. It's like they all have weird names. Oh yeah, the AEA. Yeah, the KU5A. That's let's see. I have it on this arm right here. I can probably pull it over. So that's this mic, the AEA KU5A. It is a hypercardioid ribbon, which is a super interesting kind of thing. It has quite a sound to it, in that it is not neutral by any stretch of the imagination. But the thing that I like the most about this microphone, the KU5A by AEA, is it has a super, super soft roll-off up top, which is something that's very characteristic of ribbons. It has a super soft roll-off up top, whereas the RE20 is a little bit more brittle up there. And the other thing about the KU5A that's maybe not so good with my voice with it is it has a very strong bump that's kind of like a mid-bassy type of bump. Now, my voice is not very articulate up top. It kind of lives in that lower mid-bassy type of range anyway. And so for my voice, that can be problematic. And I find myself having to thin out the bottom end of that microphone when I use it. But I will do that, though, because the top end of it is so sweet that I really like using it. So we'll see how the RE20 sounds in comparison. So that's what I am using today. I hope everybody had a great holiday. I was going to get into what my camera predictions for 2024 are. And I have quite a bit of them. Those of you who have been around the channel for a while know that I am a full-time real estate and interiors photographer. I started with Nikon crop bodies. This is before mirrorless really started to take off, with the D7200 Nikon, which I still think is a fantastic camera, by the way, even though it's however many, 6, 7 years old now or whatever it is. The first mirrorless camera that I got was the Sony a7R3. And I only bought the Sony a7R3 at the time, and this is when I became professional and turned professional and full-time into shooting interiors. I only bought the a7R3 at the time because it was out right around the same time that the a7 III was. The a7 III was the hot camera. Everybody wanted one. They were unobtainium for a while. But the local Best Buy had an a7R3 in stock. It was quite a bit more expensive, but it was a higher tier camera, allegedly. I didn't know a whole lot about the Sony system at the time. I jumped in, loved that camera. I still love that camera. And I don't know if that's just like, you know, it's got a squishy place in my heart because it was the first camera first mirrorless camera, full frame mirrorless, first full frame and mirrorless camera that I had bought. That was like 2017, 18 or so. But I really, really enjoyed that camera. I thought the 42 megapixel sensor was such a sweet spot in resolution, and it really did a lot right. So the a7 III, a7R3, I then progressed through Sony to the a7R4, used it as my primary stills camera for a couple years, and then when the A1 was released, a little bit after the A1 was released, I didn't buy it just as it was, but got the A1, used it for a couple years, and then over the past year or so, I have been getting more into Canon. So my current crop of cameras, my daily driver for real estate and interiors is the R3. And do I have it? Yes. And I have the R3 right here. So the Canon R3 is awesome. My biggest reservation about the R3 when I first was considering it is kind of everybody's. Unless you have experience with the Canon R3, you're automatically going to write it off because it is, at the time, a $6,000 camera with only a 24 megapixel sensor. And that just does not reconcile in the minds of a lot of people. And it didn't in my mind either. And I would never have paid that for it, but I ended up trading something. This camera's actually gone back and forth between Josh Satin and I a few times, and it's landed here, and I told him he's never going to get it back now. But I ended up trading, I think it was like the 28-70 f2 lens and an R5C and cash, or he did cash or something. Like it was a trade deal I did with Josh to get the R3. And you know, like I said, I wouldn't have paid for it because I can't reconcile the price to the resolution. But when I got it in hand and being used to the Sony cameras and then the Canon cameras, the R5 and the R5C, the R3 behaves a lot like the Sony A1. I have not tried the Nikon Z9 or Z8. And so I can't say 100% authoritatively that the A1 and the R3 are the two best cameras on the market, but I think you can make a pretty good case for both of those, for that statement, you know, for both of those cameras to be that. The R3 is just a different animal than the R5 variant cameras. It's faster, it feels better in hand. And kind of what I found was when I started using the Canon RF lenses, which are very sharp, very resolving, punchy, contrasty lenses, even the zooms, I mean, they look a lot like primes did just, you know, several years ago. They're that good. The Canon RF L lenses are. When I started using those, I didn't notice that it was only 24 megapixel. Not in the same sense that I noticed the Sony a7 III was 24 megapixel, because the original GM 1635 GM at the time was not as sharp or as punchy or as vibrant of a lens as the 15 to 35 RF L series Canon lens is. And so, yes, it's 24 megapixels, but the way that those optical qualities of the lenses you put in front of it in the Canon L series glass render that image coming through, it looks like it's higher resolution than 24 megapixels. Now, don't get me wrong. I also have a pair of R5Cs, and they're 45 megapixel. And if you were to peep back and forth between them, you can certainly tell the difference, you know, between the R3 and the R5C. However, the R3 certainly has more dynamic range too. All in all, it's a fantastic camera, the R3 is. And now that I have experience with it, in retrospect, I would buy one. I think I would, you know, if it were new. But it's such a strange thing and high price to get your mind around it. Until you are on the other side of that experience, you probably won't get it. So that's where I'm at right now. Canon, Sony, I have a lot of experience with different cameras through the process. I am shooting this on a red Komodo-X. I have had Blackmagic cameras, and so, and I keep up with all the camera, you know, industry news and such like that too, you know, and watch the YouTube and the creators, and, you know, as well as working with these things myself. And so here's what I think is going to happen in 2024. And we'll start at the bottom kind of the list here about stuff that nobody cares about. And that's Pentax. Okay, so is Pentax even going to continue to be around? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I don't know anything about Pentax. I know that it's a legacy company and they've been around for a bazillion years and they make photocopiers and whatever else they make. But I don't think Pentax is going to continue to go forward, because with the exception of a few very small and continually aging Pentax enthusiasts, nobody cares about them, and they don't seem to really be caring about themselves either. So we'll move on from Pentax. Just wanted to give it a mention. The next interesting one that is in a lot of strife is OM Systems, formerly Olympus. And OM Systems, I do think they're going to make it. And I think they have carved out a cool little niche in the market, but they have to be careful at the same time. And by that I mean OM Systems and Olympus, you know, they've been around for a long time. And I remember when, before smartphones and everything, what was very typical is people would have little point and shoot digital, the first mirrorless cameras, really, you know, the little point and shoot mirrorless, you know, cameras. And I'd had several of those. I'd had a Sony Cool Pix and a Nikon Power Shot, and they all had like names like that, right? And Olympus one. Actually, my parents had it, and I later, you know, they gave it to me or whatever they did. The Olympus was the best one, you know. So even from way back when, they know what they're doing. You know, the tech is there, the history's there. They have decided to hang their hat in their professional offerings on the Micro Four Thirds sensor and system. Now, here's where I think they have a cool niche, and this is where they have to be careful too, because the Micro Four Thirds sensor, there's nothing wrong with it. There are certainly use cases for it. Like, I know a lot of wildlife photographers like small sensors because you can still use a compact lens and get a lot of reach out of it. They really excel at making these little backpackable type of systems. OM System does, and they're really good at it. You know, they're nice cameras. The Micro Four Thirds mount is a universal mount. There's a lot of great glass out there for it. where they falter, though, where they have faltered of late is, like, if you look at the OM Systems flagship camera, it's a big thing. I mean, it's not quite as big as an R3, but it's an R3 style camera, right? Where it's got like the OM1, whatever it's called. It's got the integrated battery grip and and it's like, look, this is great for commercial work because of the workflow and the speed that I can use it, but I don't want to carry this backpacking. Right? I mean, that's way too big and heavy. And so OM Systems, I think if they were to tailor their current designs kind of more toward the rangefinder kind of craze, we see the Fuji, whatever that little Fuji one is, little rangefinder camera. We see cameras like Leica, that has always made the rangefinder style cameras and done them very well. I think that's where OM Systems kind of needs to live. If they had a new hot rangefinder micro four thirds kind of camera, something that is that looks pretty, because that really matters with that type of rangefinder thing. People want to wear them around their neck, a shirt like this, a garish shirt, and then you got a leather strap with a rangefinder, it just kind of completes the look for people to go on vacation. And I think OM Systems can make a killing, if they were designed more cameras like that. So I almost wanted to talk about OM Systems and Panasonic in the same kind of breath, right? In the same type of spiel, because OM Systems and Panasonic were very similar back several years ago, in that they both have micro four thirds system. And I think everybody's, Panasonic's big camera, right, was the GH5. And it was the big camera because it did 10-bit 4K 60. I think it was 10-bit 4K 60 that it did. The stabilization was really good. And nobody else was doing that at the time. You could not get a compact camera that did that. And so they were the first ones that really started doing that. And then they had the S1H, and the S1H is a brick. I've never used it. I have held an S1H at a shop once, and it was, it felt like? It felt like a Nikon D850. For those of you who know what the older Nikon DSLRs, D850 is just a big hunk of a camera. It's heavy and it's metal, and and that's kind of what the S1H was like. Their autofocus was always pretty poor. However, they have phase detect autofocus on some of their newer models, like the S5 2X. I hate the names of all these things. You should name it like Bob. But the autofocus, and it's still not great. I've got a buddy who's testing. He bought a S5 2X, the blacked out one, and he's testing it right now. Panasonic, I don't think, is really serious about competing in stills photography. They never have been, and I don't think 2024, them coming up, is going to be any exception. I don't think Panasonic is going to compete in stills photography. They excel at video cameras and at compact mirrorless hybrid cameras, and they do really well at that. They're not for me personally. I don't really like the look of them. And, that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we're not going to go into here. But, there are certainly different looks amongst sensors from same manufacturers, but then there's also family looks, right? So a lot of the Canons will look pretty similar. Sony's look pretty similar, Nikons, Fujis, and so on and so forth. You've got that same kind of color science that trends with all the companies. And Panasonic's, I've always found, are a little bit too saturated. It's hard to articulate what it is that I see with Panasonic that I don't really care for, but I do see something, and that's neither, that's not good or bad. It's just something that I like that I don't like that other people might. So, but for 2024, I don't think they're going to. They're kind of floundering. I shouldn't say they're floundering. They've had some good products lately. They've had some really good products lately, especially the S5 II, whatever it is, for $2,000, does a lot of great things, and I think they're going to keep on that route. It's really interesting what they're doing with the B-RAW and being able to record B-RAW. I think they could do ProRes internally, but B-RAW externally, something like that. But it's cool because B-RAW is an awesome codec. Way better than any of the just regular log curve baked in 10-bit codecs or even some of the RAWs that a lot of these other companies that make the compact cameras are using right now. So it's cool that they have the B-roll on board. I think they're going to continue to flesh out their line of mirrorless style video cameras, which is what I think the S5 and S5 IIX and all those things are. I mean, I just don't think they're serious about stills cameras. And I think they'll have a pretty quiet 2024. Their S5 II line was really a big jump for them. And I don't know if they've got a whole lot more to give immediately, you know, so I think they're going to have a pretty quiet 2024. I think the L-mount Alliance, the lenses that they have, they were the L-mount and those lenses. It was a strange concept at first because there weren't many of them. All the brands that use them were kind of off brands. You know, but that's really starting to get really interesting as a competitive product to the big players, you know, the Sonys and the Canons and such with their mounts. The L mount is getting pretty interesting. So Panasonic, I think, is going to have a pretty quiet 2024 because they had a banger 2023. Fuji is a little bit different. Fuji is on an absolute tear. I mean, Fuji is continuing to knock it out of the park with, it seems like, every single camera that they release. And they're another one that Fuji, I think, has made a super smart strategic decision with their lineup. And this goes back a few years in deciding not to play in the full frame pool. You know, they say, you know what, we got Sony and Canon and Nikon, and we are not going to out Sony, you know, and so we're going to stick to APS-C. We're going to have small systems, compact systems, and in the APS-C systems, they have, especially like the XH2S, that has a huge amount of dynamic range. Their XT cameras have been very well received. I had an XT3 briefly at one point in time. Everybody loves their vintage film emulations that Fuji does, and they make cameras that are fun. They're good looking. You know, they're on the rangefinder kind of craze. And then at the other end, you know, at the pro end, they've got these big, massive, medium format stuff, you know, and they are Sony sensors in them, in the GFX series cameras and also the Hasselblads. But, you know, you put that big sensor together with a sexy design, together with, you know, Fuji colors, you know, from their film emulations and things like that. It's a really cool, creative system. Are Fuji cameras going to be commercial workhorses like Sony cameras and like Canon cameras? No, they're not. They just don't function like those other cameras can and do. And I'm somebody who, you know, I use these as tools. And so that's a big consideration of mine, is the workflow aspect of these cameras. There are a lot of other people, photographers, good photographers, that, you know, they don't have a brisk workflow and they want to be inspired when they shoot something. And I think Fuji cameras are really good for that. And I might still check them out, you know, because they're cool, man. You know, I want to check out Fuji cameras more. So let's talk about Nikon a little bit. Well, let me bring up some of the comments here. Okay, AEA, King Kruk, Panasonic has some good offerings in their camera bodies. They do. They really do. And I don't want it to seem like I'm throwing shade at Panasonic, because I'm really not. I just don't care for them. I just don't care for them. You know, I never really have. They seem like kind of an off-brand to me, and in a pinch would get you screen grabs for photography off your KX for work. Yeah, it does. So the KX is, I can take screen grabs from it. Now, that's a tough question to answer directly, because it has to do with shutter speed, right? If you figure my work in photographing and taking video of homes for sale, not many of those frames that I would get from the KX are static. And so, you know, the KX is a global shutter. You know, that certainly helps. But, you know, it's always in motion. And so I don't know, actually. You know what? I should maybe try that. I should try that. I guess the answer should be I don't know, because I haven't really tried to take a screen. Well, I take that back. I've taken a screen grab from the KX in like a situation like this, like a talking head, and used it plenty of times as like thumbnails for YouTube videos and stuff. But if we're talking about deliverable photography to clients, I have a bit of a higher standard for that. Would it suffice for that? It doesn't quite have the same amount of latitude as like a raw stills image does. It certainly has enough resolution, you know, because it's a 6K read, and that it's a global shutter. Maybe I wouldn't have a problem with shutter speed. I don't know. I'll try it sometime. I'll report back. It's an interesting question, though. So thank you for asking it. Going full on for my work on Nikon Z8 IX and getting all their fastest lenses. Well, you actually gave me a good segue right there, because King Croc, I was just about to talk about Nikon. So, well, let me just briefly go back to Fuji and say Fuji for 2024, because that's what this video is. I think they're going to continue on their roll. Much like Panasonic, Fuji had a really, really nice 2023 with the XH2S, I think was a 2023 camera, the GFX 100 Mark II, if that's what they're calling it. That's an exciting camera. So, you know, Fuji had a really good 2023, but they did it in a way that just kind of suggests that they can keep doing it, you know, that there's more coming in Fuji world. So I think 2024, Fuji's going to be strong. They're going to come out with some cameras that are going to surprise everybody. I still think it's interesting, and a buddy of mine and I were talking about this just this morning, about how Sony, I think Sony is selling sensors. Sony sells sensors to pretty much everybody except Canon and Red and Blackmagic. I think is getting them supplied by somebody else now. But everything else has got Sony sensors in it, right? But what's interesting is the XH2S has a stacked APS-C sensor, and the XH2S also has a huge amount of dynamic range in video we're talking about specifically here. And it's interesting that Sony did not decide to use that sensor for the FX30 camera that they have, you know. So like the XH2S in most measurable ways seems to provide better image quality than the Sony FX30. So if they're buying that sensor from Sony, and sure, they're doing their own special sauce to it once they have it, but why would Sony sell them that sensor? Why wouldn't they use it in their own camera, in their FX30, right? So that's kind of interesting. But I think Fuji's bringing it. I mean, they're on a roll. They're gaining market share. I can't see how they wouldn't be, because these cameras are coming out with, they're just cool, man. They're just so fun, and you know, and they're priced well, and you know, people love them, and the glass is getting really good, and you know, so Fuji's awesome. So going to Nikon, King Croc, because I know your ears are burning for Nikon, so we're getting there. I have thought to buy a Z8 or 9. Probably a 9, but I don't know. Nikon. Okay. Let me prepare for this one, because you may or may not like what I'm about to say. Okay. Nikon. And I love Nikon, you know, as I was saying, like, you know, as I was starting out, my journey in photography begins with Nikon, you know, with the D7200. They were the last to release their mirrorless camera, right? Sony already had the A7 III, Canon had the EOS R, Nikon was still, I remember at the time, they were like not only not selling mirrorless cameras, but they were betting on that horse. You know, they were actively making statements like, we're going to keep on selling SLR cameras. You know, this is the mirrorless thing. It's not a thing. You know, we're going to sell DSLRs. And they had the D850, and it was, by a lot of people's estimation, the best DSLR that's ever been created, the Nikon D850. So, you know, so they had some clout in that game, and they were still competitive with everyone else at that turning point in time. Canon moved, Nikon didn't. Nikon a year or two later, then they finally did, but it was a little bit too late. You know, they had lost a huge amount of market share already to Canon and Sony. And while they have been making really good products of late, and I have zero doubt that the Z8 and Z9 are amazing products. I've never even held one, but you know, so I wouldn't be able to say completely, but I have zero doubt they're amazing products because I know people who do use them, and you know, I've seen a bazillion hours of content about it, and sure, you know, they're great. Nikon knows what they're doing, building cameras. But recently, okay, in 2023, there was the Z8. The Z8 is a fantastic camera, but it was, in my opinion, a sign of how unhealthy Nikon's R&D is, because they had a couple years to build a camera that would compete with the Alpha 1. The Z9 doesn't do it, you know, in a few different ways. And we, you know, have gone off the deep end into the flash sync speed and all that kind of stuff because they've chosen to not put a mechanical shutter in the thing, but it's just not the same. You know, the A1 is still, to this day, the current king of the hill, you know, in a lot of these respects. So Nikon had the Z9, and gosh, you know, it looked like an amazing camera. It probably is. And then they had 2 years to give us something else, right? To say, well, okay, Sony is going to take the Alpha 1 and they're going to take the R line, and what are we going to do? We're going to give it an AI focusing chip. We're going to put that Gumby flippy tilty screen. That screen is awesome too, by the way. We're going to put the Gumby screen on it. That's what I call it, the Gumby screen. And they made a really, really strong camera in the A7R5, even though it has an older sensor in it. Canon, the same thing, man. I mean, they're, you know what, they have the R3, which is something that is, I get it now. You know, R3, you might have to own it to get it first before you do. But I get it now. The R5C is probably the world's most powerful true hybrid camera. It is crazy how powerful the R5C is. And even though I have a pair of them, and I've had a pair of them for, gosh, it's probably a couple of years now, I didn't like that camera at all at first, you know, and I'll come right out and say I didn't like it. All the things that people don't like about the R5C, the battery life and the no wireless in video, like, and all this other stuff, I hated it. You know, I ended up, you know, I felt like I got stuck with one because I was beyond my return window, and I don't typically like to sell a lot of things. It's a hassle. So, okay, I'll use it. You know, I have it and such, and I love the R5C now. After using it for a couple of years, and it's kind of, you know, it's like peeling back an onion, and it is so incredibly powerful, the R5C is, for what it is. So I am going somewhere with this. And so my point is, this is what Canon was doing in that couple year period. Sony was doing things like the A7R5 and, you know, and the AI thing and the Gumby screen thing and all that. Okay. Nikon in that same period of time whittled down the Z9 to a lower price point. That's all they did. So is it still a fantastic camera? Yeah. Is it a stacked full frame high resolution sensor for, I think it's 4,000 US? Yeah. That's a huge value proposition. I have nothing wrong with the Z8. I think the Z8 is a baller. I mean, it's on point, you know, the Z9, Z8, everything. But I have a problem with them taking 2 years to not really innovate anything. And so even though the Z8 can stand on its own amongst all the current cameras that are out, that to me is problematic. You know, it's problematic to, like I said, it kind of screams of an R&D department that isn't particularly robust. You know, not to the point where like the Sonys and Canons and even Fujis of the world is. And so I'm kind of a little bit worried about Nikon because of that. What is 2024 going to bring for Nikon? Man, they got to wake up. You know, they got to wake up, and they have, for the past, ever since mirrorless cameras have been a thing, 5 or 6 years, they have been playing catch up, whereas they used to be top dog or going, you know, toe to toe with Canon for being top dog. But, and we're going to get into Canon and Sony in a second here. And Canon and Sony, it's you absolutely, if you're talking about Canon, you need to talk about Sony. You know, it's just one of those things. You know, you can talk about everybody else, and then Canon and Sony are their own tier of product, really, right? So finishing up on Nikon, what is 2024 going to bring for Nikon? What are my predictions for Nikon? I don't know. I think they have probably the most mysterious roadmap of any of these companies. You know, it's hard to see direction at Nikon right now. I mean, they're a huge company. You know, they make not only cameras, they make optics for all kinds of other things, you know, binoculars and rifle scopes and all kinds of other stuff, you know, and so they're, you know, the cameras aren't their only thing. In fact, I'm probably pretty sure they make more of those other things than they do cameras. But they really need to wake up and smell the coffee. All right, let me look at the comments here real quick. Let's see if Nikon ZAZI, we got that one. King Croc, if you do get a Z8-9, I would definitely be interested in your experience thoughts. I've always been interested in the Z8 and the Z9. You know, I mean, am I curious enough to spend $4 or $5 grand on a camera that I have questions about the solvency and heritage of the company going forward? I don't know. That's the only thing that's ever held me back. I don't think there's anything wrong with the cameras. For me, wishful thinking is a Nikon cinema body. I actually predicted that. So the video a lot like this that I did either this year or last year, I kind of predicted that. You know, I said, oh, this year, and it didn't come to pass, right? And it was a wrong, bad prediction on my part. But I said, oh, I think Nikon's going to have a, you know, a video camera. Maybe not a full-on cine camera with NDs and XLRs and all that stuff, right? But a real video camera, you know, one that's, you know, maybe compact, sure, you know, maybe using one of the bodies like the Z8, Z9, whatever, but video focus, so it has different tools on it and such, and, you know, able to shoot internal RAW. And whatever happened with that? There was a thing with them in red, and I think Nikon won that. So I don't know if the Z8-9 whatever currently shoots internal RAW after that whole kerfuffle. So I don't know, man. I think I don't know what I don't know if Nikon knows what Nikon's going to do. They don't have any influencers really per se. They've got there's like this old guy that sits around and he does live streams with like 3 or 4 other old guys, and they sit around eating like M&M peanuts and talking about the good old days. So there's like him and I forgot what his name is. He's got this big like Texas radio voice too. I'm jealous of his voice. He wouldn't have microphone problems like I do. If I had a voice like that, I wouldn't have him. But Nikon, they don't really involve themselves in social media. I think Nikon still has a very good market share that I can see anyway in my limited scope amongst portrait shooters. So even their mirrorless cameras, I know a lot of photographers. I mean, not just a few, many photographers who are using Z6s and Z7s, Z6s and Z7s to shoot portraiture, to shoot weddings and things like that. I just don't think that they're particularly well represented in the social channels. They don't have the YouTube influencers, so you're not going to get Nikon in front of your face all the time like you will Canon and Sony. And so I don't know. I hope, Nikon's one of those companies I want Nikon to work. Nikon cameras are so cool, but I'm fearful that they're on the wrong path, and they have been for many years, and they haven't figured out a way to right that ship yet. So we'll see. We'll see what 2024 brings. Canon and Sony. I don't know if I can talk about these individually without talking about both of them, but I will talk about them individually, but kind of preface that by saying these are clearly, as far as the consumer cameras, and we're not talking about Reds and Aries and even like Leicas and Hasselblads and things like that. Okay, we're talking about cameras that you can go buy at Best Buy, right? Sony and Canon are clearly ahead of everybody else in terms of tech, in terms of product offerings, in terms of sales, in terms of marketing, you know, with their programs with influencers and everything. And not only is that true, but I kind of feel like with each passing year, they widen that gap. You know, the Alpha 1 is absolutely insane. It's nuts. You know, it's got, like I said, it's got a 1/400th of a second flash sync speed because of how fast that 50 megapixel stacked sensor reads. And I mean, you know, it's just a marvel, you know, things like that. I enjoy Sony's implementation of the dual card slots being CF Express Type A. And there are plenty of people out there that will hem and haw about that, saying, "Oh, you know, they're so expensive and they're not as fast as CFXB." All that's true, okay. But what's also true is they're coming down in price. They're much more compact than CFXB, which leaves you a lot of room in the body to have two of them on board. And critically, and I think a lot of people don't think about this, they don't heat up. You know, so I've had several cameras with CFX-A cards in them and several cameras with CFX-B cards in them. CFX-B cards get toasty. You know, they get really hot in whatever camera you want to talk about. It's just how the data is written to them, that much data can be written to them. Maybe, I don't know. But CFX Type A cards, maybe because they're smaller, maybe because they have less capacity for, you know, high data streams, they just don't tend to heat up thermally as much as CFXB. So for a lot of reasons, you know, that you can have symmetrical media on board, that it's smaller, that it doesn't heat up. You know, I think that's a really good solution that Sony's after. Although it must be said that their new cine camera, I call it Burrito Cam, it's the Burano, has a CFXB. They understand the limitations there on the speed. But for average work, for daily work, for anything probably that you and I are going to do, the CFX Type A is fine. It's fast enough. I mean, they're really fast in practice. They really are. So I don't think you're going to see a difference between that. So let's talk about, gosh, how do I even get into this, right, with Sony and Canon? Let's take a look at 2023. So Sony in 2023, it in my mind was a pretty underwhelming year for Sony in 2023. The A7R5, I don't know if that was 2023 or 2022. It just seems like a half-baked camera. I had one for about a month, and I was very familiar with the system in that I'd used the A7R4 and the A1, each of them for a couple of years respectively, as they were released as my main cameras doing my commercial work. The A7R5. So when I went from the A7R4 to the A1, the thing that immediately jumped out to me about the A1 versus the A7R4, other than, you know, the stability of the camera and all that kind of stuff, was the A1 files have way more grading latitude in them. Okay, so it's kind of like if anybody's ever worked with a RED camera, R3D, it's really hard to explain to people if all they're used to working with is like 8-bit and 10-bit and, you know, 12-bit or whatever, you know, what a 16-bit R3D file behaves like. And a lot can be said, especially in the highlights, between the A7R4 and the Alpha 1. And now it turns out that behavior, I believe, is in large part because of the sensor. Let me see. I feel like I'm missing comments here. Maybe not. That's the end of them. Is that the end of them? So in large part because of this, it's the sensor. And I know that now because I'd had the A7R4 for a couple of years. Then I changed to the Alpha 1. I saw an immediate difference in the recoverability of highlights, especially with the Alpha 1 versus the older A7R4. And then when Sony came out with the A7R5, they did so, they built a really good camera around an old sensor. And that's the best way, that's the best single sentence way that I can describe the A7R5. It is a really good camera around an old sensor. And the old sensor that they built it around, it's really noisy, first off. The A7R4, A7R5, they are really noisy sensors. And what's interesting about that is when you take a look at, you know, like the Cine Ds and the DxO Marks, you know, the labs of the world that shoot charts and stuff like that, they won't have that same conclusion. You know, say, no, this is great, you know, because the signal to noise ratio is this when they're shooting out a Xyla chart and, you know, whatever. And it's like, well, when you go out and work with these things, you know, and you're intimate with them, you know, and you're, you know, like that, and, you know, in your daily using them as tools and you're working with the files and stuff. I mean, you start learning their personality beyond what you can just glean from somebody who's shooting charts. Now, I'm not saying that isn't important. I'm not saying that what they're saying is false. I'm just saying that in practice, often these tools behave a little bit differently than what you think they would based upon the chart shooting and such that these firms do. So the A1 sensor and the A7R4 sensor, which is then the A7R5 sensor, I think the A7R5 was a big miss because of that. However, the A7 IV, I believe, is Sony's best current camera. It really is. It is better than the A1 at some things. I think it's Sony's newest full frame sensor, first off, you know, is the A7 IV. I think the colors are right with it. I think the colors are a little bit better than in the A1. The raw files straight out of camera, and then with the like the Lightroom profile transform on the A7 IV, they're punchier. They're punchier, they're more contrasty, they're more vibrant than the Alpha 1. The Alpha 1's a little bit flatter, you know, and so you say, well, who cares, you know, because you can grade that. Yeah, you can. You know, you can grade that. But there's really a lot to like about the A7 IV. The 30, I think it's 33, it's either 31 or 33 megapixel of the A7 IV is a really sweet spot in resolution for full frame. You know, whereas, and here's the other thing about Sony cameras versus Canon cameras. Sony RAW files are heavier than Canon RAW files. And this is something that I really realized when I had the Canon R5 and R5C. I had them both at the same time at one point. R5 and R5C, which are both 45 megapixel, and the Sony A1, which is 50 megapixel. The Sony RAW files are about twice the data of the Canon RAW files. And there isn't a huge amount of difference in the robustness of grading those files. You know, nothing that would cause you to think like, oh yeah, you know, that's why. Let's see, did I miss any comments here? King crap, yep, fastest lenses, and I think you had one more here. Was the Nikon 7.5? No, that's it. Okay. So, if Sony had put the A7 IV sensor, which I think, you know, price notwithstanding, of course the A1 sensor is badass, right? I mean, and they're putting it in their, you know, their Venice, allegedly, like in the burrito cam and all that stuff, right? But the A7 IV is so good, and the A7 IV had to be good because it was following the A7 III. The A7 III is the camera that everybody knows just turned the industry on its head. right? And so you got to follow that up with something, and I think the A7 IV effectively did that. It's a brilliant camera in all kinds of ways. The only real flaw I think with the A7 IV is the sensor read speed. And so if you're trying to do video with the A7 IV, like you can't do full frame slow-mo, it's got to crop in, and that's just a limitation of how fast the sensor reads, which also means that you get the rolling shutter jelloing effects and such too. It's just a slow sensor. So it was one that was built to a price point, and those are the types of things that do get better and faster over time. So I think if they were to have put that sensor in the A7R5 package, so with the Gumby screen and the AI focusing and all that, like that would be an incredible camera. And Sony for 2024 has so much part spin stuff that they can cobble together like that. The Alpha 1 Mark II, which I think is coming this next year. I do think it will be. That's going to have all that stuff. It's going to have the Gumby screen. It's going to have the AI chip. It's, it's all the fancy stuff. Sony already has really the best EVFs, like the Sony 9 point whatever million dot EVF. And it's not the same in the A7S III and the A1. The A1 has a higher refresh rate than the A7S III does, but that is a beautiful EVF. And I don't think anybody that I've seen has a better one so far. So and Sony supplies the whole world with sensors. They are going to continue to just drop hit after hit for 2024. 2023 was kind of weak for Sony. There wasn't a lot that was really interesting that came out other than Burano. But 2024, I think, is Sony's year. Now, Canon's kind of on the same trajectory. But Canon is, I don't know why they take their time. Like, where's the 35 prime, right? It's like, we can't get through a whole podcast without talking about where the heck are the 24 and the 35. So, but Canon's trajectory is, and this is why these two companies, Sony and Canon, are so really above everybody else in this I can walk into Best Buy and buy it type of camera category. Again, notwithstanding the Leicas and Hasselblads of the world. Canon's going to bring it too. Now, we all have seen all the chatter about the R5 Mark II, about the R1. What is it going to be? What is it not going to be? You can take a look at my previous videos that I have recorded, and I have some predictions about what they are or are not going to be. Briefly, I believe the R1 is going to be around 35 megapixel. Canon does not. Canon is Canon's kind of an enigma because Sony is at the forefront of the tech, but they're also interested in competing. They're also interested in competing. They've got influencers, on their dole and such. Canon is also at the forefront of tech. They are building comparable products in nearly every way to Sony, but they're kind of not interested in competing. And so why, if Sony's flagship has 50 megapixel on the Alpha 1 and Nikon's flagship has 45 megapixel on the Z9, why would Canon not make their R1 more resolution? At least as much. Why would it not be 45? Why would it not be 50? Because the main reason is they don't care. They don't care about that. They need to see how it makes sense. They're not going to do it just because the other guy did it. And Canon's kind of like that. Like, they really are. They're like Apple. Apple tells you what you want, and then they sell it to you. And since you like Apple, you buy it. And Canon, I think, is kind of like that too in a lot of ways. So, they don't listen to anybody. They kind of do their own thing. And 35 megapixels or so is perfect for, because even though this is a high-end, a flagship stills camera, video is one of the metrics that these flagships are increasingly becoming compared against each other with, right? So it's going to have to do 8K, 35, 36, whatever, depending on aspect ratio. That's about what you need for 8K, right? So I think that's the minimum you need for 8K. I think Canon knows they have to put 8K in the thing. Other than that, their sensor tech is their full frame sensor tech. They do have the DGO in the C70, which is really interesting, but their full frame sensor tech is easily a couple years, couple generations behind Sony's. And so the R3 sensor is really good, but it's only 24 megapixel. Do they have the tech to be able to make commercially available? Because I know they can do it, you know, but are they going to be able to hit the price point? And will they be able to sell them in such? Well, can they make commercially available a sensor that is an A1 like sensor that is twice the resolution of the R3? That's a 50 megapixel sensor. It's still stacked, you know, reads out super fast. I don't think Canon can do that. I just don't. I don't think it's within their capacity right now to make something like that. So I think they know they have to up the resolution. I think they still want it to be stacked for obvious reasons. They're not going to go global, that's for sure. And I forgot to talk about the Sony global sensor. That's probably what King Crux telling me about right now, right? So what, I'm assuming you mean Canon gear, are you going to go forward in 2024? That's a good question. I'll get to that. But yeah, about the global sensor thing with the A9 Mark III, you know, it's hard. You know why I didn't say that about Sony in 2023? Because, and I've seen the petapixel guys kind of had this same problem. Is like, do you call it 2023 or do you call it 2024? Because we're still a couple months away from being able to get the thing, right? But I think I'm going to lump it into 2024. You know, 2024 camera, Sony's continuing to kill it, right? And global sensor, A9 Mark III is just one of those things. And I am very curious and very tempted by that camera. By the way, I might get one, you know, just for the flash sync capability alone. But I have yet to see anybody test it with Godox stuff. So like this trigger here, and, you know, I use Godox like 8200s and stuff. And so I don't know if they're huge flash sync that the global shutter you know, facilitates works with that, you know, because if it's like, oh, you got to use some Sony, that's like, okay, but does Sony make any lights that are going to work for me? Or do I have to pay through the nose for Pro Photo? Or, you know what I mean? So I'm waiting to see more people test that before I decide to jump in on that or not. But as I was saying, Canon doesn't have that tech, man. You know, they're not going to make a global anything. I don't think the R1's going to have it. There's no way. It's going to be stacked. It's going to be fast. And it's going to be 30 or something so megapixels, maybe 45. If Canon takes the R1 to 45 megapixels, they're going to take the R5 variant cameras beyond that. You know, and they're going to go for like the A7R type of territory with, you know, around 60 megapixels or whatever. That's a whole nother conversation that I'm not going to get into because, you know, you get into pixel density and all that. You know, I think at some point you need to start getting medium format cameras for that. A9 III is very interesting, but I will only get one if there is some kind of video ability that I need. I am kind of the opposite. And I agree with that statement, by the way. But I'm kind of the opposite in that the A9 III to me is a stills camera. And global shutter is one of those things that often gets discussed as a video feature, you know, for obvious reasons with, you know, with fast motion and, you know, jelloing and, you know, and all that. But I use lights every day. And for me, the amount of control that global shutter gives you as it relates to flash sync speed is really the headline feature for me to the A9 Mark III. I have a global shutter, you know, I'm looking at one. You know, I've got a Komodo-X, which is a fantastic global shutter video camera. It will be cool, you know, I mean, because it's a full frame. The Sony A9 III is a global shutter, and that's a first, right? The dynamic range is still not really known, which is interesting because people, you know, maybe I should just watch more YouTube, right? That's all I need. This is my slow time of the year anyway, so I can. I haven't seen it. It's always been like kind of mysterious, you know, and Sony usually is, they say, oh, it's got however many stars. They didn't say And nobody else has really said yet. I don't know if all these see, people are so afraid of pissing off Sony. All the YouTubers are, because they'll stop getting cameras. If they tell you that thing's a turd and it doesn't have a dynamic range, So so that'll be interesting, to see that. I want so let me rephrase my statement. I will be interested in an A9 III if I figure out it can work with Komodo-X flash triggers and stuff to a whatever flash. It's probably not going to be its max 80,000 with that system, but to whatever it works, something that's usable for me. I'm interested in that. And I'm also interested in the dynamic range, which I don't think we've seen anybody test yet. So let me see. What was your question? I forgot what you said. You said this. Oh, we already talked about A9 III. Okay, so what Canon gear are you going for 2024? So I'm going to be selling one of my R5Cs here pretty soon, and I just don't need to. When I got them, hey, two, and I could do multicam work and sync, and they're great for that. But it's like I don't do multicam work all that often, and when I do, I can throw up like the Komodo and the R3, or the Komodo and the R5C, or the R3 and the R5C. You know what? And I do the work so infrequently that it's not like a real workflow thing for me. I can get the cameras to match with some tweaking in post. They're all so robust nowadays that you can do that, especially if you're doing different angles. If you don't have like, I need to match this same shot where both cameras are like right side by side each other. It's like, it's not like that. If it's two different angles, then it's fine. So I'm going to sell the R5C. I probably will. I don't know. That's not an easy question to answer directly, King Croc. I think it will depend on between the R1 and the R5 Mark II. I most likely will buy one of those cameras, and it's going to depend almost completely on the resolution of the camera. And that's to say, I will not buy the R1 if it's not in the 30 megapixel region at least. I think the 30, 35, I think that would be a fantastic resolution for the R1 to be, and I'd buy it in a second if it were that. I will not buy the R1. I'm more pessimistic about really high resolution, just because I know what my needs are, and that introduces problems too. So I will not buy the R5 Mark II if it goes much beyond the 45 megapixels that it already is, and that the R5C is. It just slows me down too much. Those files, and by the way, I do use, even though the R3 is my daily driver and it's 24 megapixel, I still do use the R5C to do higher end work, to do like builders and things like that, because when I'm photographing homes for builders, their marketing a lot of times is more robust, and so you're framing for copy, and I've seen my work on like big signs and stuff like that, and so just giving them the extra resolution to play with is always good. So I will not buy either of those cameras if they're over about 50 megapixels or so. I think, to me, that's medium format territory, and I'd rather spend my money, especially in the case of like as expensive as the R1 is going to be. If I want higher resolution than what I already currently own, my highest resolutions being the 45 megapixel R5Cs, I'm going to go medium format. I'm going to have a bigger sensor behind it for a lot of reasons. So I will probably buy the R1 over the R5 II if it is within that 30 to 50 megapixel, whichever one's 30 to 50 megapixel range, I'm going to buy that one. If both of them are, I'm going to buy the R1. The R1 is going to this is a tool for me, and I don't mind spending another few $1,000 or whatever, if it's going to make me a couple $100,000, in the big end over the, few years that I have it. That's fine. Let's see. Z8. My Z8 is extremely fast for photography way more than what I need. So the A9 III doesn't do anything for me for photography. Yeah, I can see that. So only a video feature is so compelling, I will consider getting it. Yeah, are you using strobes though? You know, are you using lights? Because that's my consideration. You know, is using lights, and so in that regard, the global shutter is, because the Z8 and the Z9, they don't. It's still a rolling shutter, but it's an electronic shutter. It doesn't have a mechanical shutter in any kind of way, and so they really suffer with flash sync speed because of that. I think they're at like 1/200th or 2/50th maybe at best, which, you know, the R3 is too, but the A1 is 400th, and now the A9 III is, who knows, right? Could be as much as 80,000, which is enormous and really, really interesting to me. You know, so being able to work with lights is an enormous consideration to me for any of these cameras we're talking about, because I do like using stills cameras for stills and video cameras for video, with the exception maybe of the R5C. You know, like I said, it's a super powerful system that I think doesn't get enough credit for how powerful it is. R1 with no C-Log2 and maybe upgraded HDMI. Maybe an upgrade HDMI to mini HDMI. I don't know if they're going to put C-Log. You know what, Canon is so, you know, they're like the old man of the block as far as like what they put in protecting their lines and stuff. I don't think they'll ever put C-Log2 in a stills focused camera, R1 or not. I just don't think it's going to happen. You know, they're going to put C-Log2 in the C70s and in the C300 and C500 and all these other things, you know, and whatever cinema cameras come in next, which they've got to have one pretty soon because they're getting all pretty long in the tooth now. I don't see them putting C-Log2. I don't. And like, I've talked about this before, and so has everybody else. Like, when you shoot on the R5C and you do so in 8K, or you crop into Super 35 and you do it on 6K RAW, you can then interpret that footage into a C-Log2 gamma curve, right? And whether the sensor has enough dynamic range to cover that or not. And I think in Canon's estimation, it does not. And I'll agree with that. You know, the R5C is not a particularly good sensor for dynamic range, right? Whether it has enough total latitude to cover that log profile or not, the way that it approaches the white point and the way that those highlights roll off in a soft kind of way in C-Log2 is better than interpreting that footage as C-Log3. If you interpret the footage as C-Log3, it looks clippy. It looks video-y. You know, if you interpret it as C-Log2, maybe you're giving up dynamic range somewhere. I don't care. You know, maybe the shadows are junk. I don't care. You know, because the way that I use the camera, photographing and shooting video of interiors, it is a huge amount of dynamic range when you have a bright window blowing, you know, and if I can get a little bit more resolution in that, then that's great, you know, and that's why C-Log2 is like, that's why I want to use it, you know. Hey, Carlos, late to the party. Yo. Happy New Year to you as well. How you doing, bud? Let's see. I've seen some R5C footage in the dynamic range. These pros are able to get, yeah. How do they get high dynamic range footage? I think, I mean, the R5C is, you know, the best images you can get out of the R5C, I'm absolutely convinced of this now, is shooting RAW. And Carlos, actually, you know what? Carlos is in here now. I've seen before where he has said that he gets better results in the R5C shooting RAW and interpreting it as C-Log3, not as C-Log2. And it was something I think he'd said is when he was making his LUTs and stuff for it. And he has some LUTs you should check out if you're interested in R5C stuff. He says there's something about the color representation in the C-Log3 versus C-Log2 in that particular camera with that sensor. You know, he struggles a little bit less with it when he interprets that raw footage as C-Log3 versus C-Log2. I like interpreting it as C-Log2 for the reason that I just said, because as the highlights approach that white point, it's a softer, you know, more logarithmic kind of landing up to that white point, I have found. However, the C-Log3 baked in 10-bit post the Netflix firmware update is what I call it. You know, it's when the R5C became Netflix approved. It is better now on the other side of that firmware. So let's see. So I've been going for an hour and 14. So let's. Okay, you guys still want to chat? I can still chat. Let's see. Let's see. Fact: C-Log 3 looks better on the R5C, but only in RAW, not the baked in for me. I know that's really, you know, that's really the pisser about the R5C in general. Is like you kind of you have to shoot the RAW, you know, for the camera to look really good. You can do it in the 10-bit, but it's just, and really it's a catch-22 because the best image quality you're getting out of the R5C is shooting RAW. You know, whether you interpret it as C-Log 2, C-Log 3, or what, you know, it's best in RAW. But oh my word, the Canon 8K RAW is like, let me put it in perspective, okay? Because I think, Carlos, you're on an Apple, the Mac Studio, I think you're on right now. I have something equally as serious in the PC world, you know. The Canon 8K RAW just brings it to its knees still. You know, like I don't know how they've made such an inefficient, hard codec to work with, you know, but like, I mean, like Red RAW or B RAW, ProRes, I mean, everything else is butter. I mean, it's not, Canon RAW is just, you know, I don't know what kind of system to build for Canon RAW, or if you even can, you know, maybe it's just that it's a really old codec, but I agree with Carlos. Like, you know, whether we're talking about C-Log 2 or C-Log 3, to get the most out of the R5C, you shoot it RAW. And the R3, which we haven't really talked much about. So the R3 has more dynamic range than the R5C does. Absolutely, it does. But it's the same kind of thing. You know, you got to shoot it in RAW, and it's 6K RAW. It's a little bit lighter than the 8K RAW Canon, but it's still that awful codec. You know, so saw you mention on Josh's live that you considered selling KX. Is it not getting enough usage? You know, I'm actually I'm gonna make a video about that, and the video I'm gonna make about that is. Okay, so there's really a couple things that are intersecting here. One of it is I really wanted for the new year to minimize. I wanted to minimize just as it relates to efficiency and such, and, you know, and getting jobs done and whatnot. And so I thought, well, if I sell the KX, because it wasn't getting a lot of use, it still isn't getting a lot of use. You know, if I sell the KX, I could then go to one system, which would be Canon. And even though the KX is still okay for that because it's an RF mount, it's still not Canon. You know, it's still a very much a different ecosystem, different workflow and such. You know what? I can just go with Canon. And Canon has all the tools, you know, that I can use. But I couldn't at the last minute make myself do it. It's just, and really, and here's the thing that I might make the video about. The thing that really shifted me is I recently have shot a pair of builder homes. In fact, if you look at my recorded videos, one that I just posted yesterday, that's the one that I shot with the KX. So I did everything with these things. I shot stills, video, Matterport 3D tours, all that kind of stuff. And one of them I shot with the R5C. Soup to nuts, everything with the R5C. The other I shot the stills with the R5C and the video with the KX. And these are two homes, okay? So to give you a picture here, an idea, they're two new builder homes. They are right next door to each other, and they are the same floor plan except just reversed, right? And so they're a 180 mirror of each other, but they're right next to each other, same house, same location, you know? So it's like, this is a pretty, you know, I was like, this is a pretty good way to kind of show these two cameras, you know, back and forth. And when it comes down to it, the KX was just, I got such a better final product out of the one that I shot with the Komodo-X. And so I'm like, you know what? I only ever really use this camera for doing higher end, you know, like the builder homes or ones that are like millions of dollars. And you know, and I like do talking head stuff with it and whatever. And I used to be squeamish about like, oh, how many hours? Like, I don't care, man. You know, whatever. I'm gonna run it. So I was gonna sell the KX. I don't think I'm gonna do that anymore. You know, and Carlos is kind of like, you know, he'll tell you, man. It's just, and Josh too. He'll tell you too. It's like, you know, something about red cameras is like, you can't unsee it. You know, once you see it, and you see a lot of the chatter like online and stuff with people, every single one of my videos that I've shot on a red camera, I think every single one of them, maybe not the one yesterday because it was just uploaded yesterday, but every single one of them, there's some dude that says, yeah, come on, man. You know, you could have shot that on an iPhone, you know, or like, that's a $12,000 setup you got right there, you know, with the camera and lens, stuff like that. Man, you know, A7S3, bro. You know, that's $3,000. You wasted your money, you know, and it's like, look, can you get good images out of those other systems? Absolutely. And I have, you know, I used an A7S3. I've shot probably 100 homes with an A7S3. It made me a pile of money. But it doesn't look the same. You know, and kind of, and when you see that, when you see that look, you can't unsee it. And not only can you not unsee it, but Red Raw, just every codec should work like Red Raw, but they don't. Red Raw is the only one that works like that. You know, the other thing that the Komodo cameras have going for them is the app, the control app. Okay. Every camera should have a control app. See, that's me. Hi. Every camera should have a control app like that, where I can do everything in real time, you know, but they don't. So, you know, that's why I haven't, sold it, and I probably won't. You know, I'm hearing people chalking up M chips with C200 raw footage. Oh, you know, my C200s that I had, I had no problem doing the raw. In fact, I had a pretty good workflow for a while there, where I had two C200s, you know, one here, one there, and I had SSD caddies for them. And it's like a workaround, because the C200 is an old camera, right? So it's a workaround where it was a CFast 2 card that it would take standard, and I would shove the CFast 2. It's some Amazon thing, right? You shove the dummy card in there, and then it goes to a 2.5-inch caddy, and but it works. Yeah, it works. And so I was shooting raw to these 2.5-inch caddies, and then I had a dual 2.5-inch. I don't think it's FireWire. I think it was USB-C 3. To the system, you know, so I would just take them out of the caddies and then go and it would work. I mean, I could, you know, do 2 streams of C200 raw simultaneously in Premiere without really. I think I maybe monitored it in like 50% resolution, so I monitored it at like 1080, but it was fine. You know, and it worked. And I was just doing like talking head YouTube kind of stuff too. Josh tried it with C200 and his system like farted and died, you know? So it depends. It's interesting about all these systems, right? So it's like, some people would take that to me like, oh, the Apples aren't as good. No, it's maybe not with that camera, with that codec, you know, but you're looking at, there are things my PC would struggle with that the Mac Studios will go through like butter. You know, it's really a case by case thing. You know, as awesome as other cameras are, when you put other cameras side by side next to your red, there's no competition. I know. So maybe I will make that video, and I'll show, you know, I'll show clips from both of those homes that are like side by side. And it's like, look, you know, these are the best my skills can get at grading the R5C RAW and the Komodo RAW, because people will always say like, oh, well, you know, I've seen people get better images out of the R5C. Probably, you know, I've never said I'm the best at grading, but my skill set is consistent, you know, between the R5C and the KX. So if the KX gives me a better usable image, one that I can deliver to my clients and charge them a lot of money for, that's the tool for me, you know? So, and my skills get better over time. Everybody's do, you know. Red is way convenient as a workflow. It is so incredibly robust. You know, it's a color explosion. So John's probably going to sell his OG. I know. I'm tempted to pick it up from Josh, but you know, probably the last thing I need is more red cameras. It's like I went from 0 to 180, right? Like it's like, you know, a few weeks ago I'm like, I'm gonna sell my KX now. I was like, man, I could use another one. You know? Okay. For your work, are you running all RF lenses? Are you still using some EF stuff? I'm still using some EF stuff. In fact, I've got an EF lens on here right now. I've got the Sigma to 18 to 35 Cucaracha, I call it, because everybody has one. And it's through the dummy adapter. It's not being speed boosted. So what's interesting about that, King Croc, is I do use EF lenses on the Komodo. With the exception, I do have a 24 millimeter tilt shift that I use sometimes for stills, adapted to, you know, the RF bodies. But I use EF lenses on the Komodos. I don't particularly like using the speed booster though. Even the Canon one, it's good. It still is another piece of glass. It still softens the image a little bit. It still gives you some kind of weird flares and ghosts. And it's like, you know, like the RF glass is already so much sharper than most EF glass, with the exception maybe of the Cucaracha, because this lens is sharper than it has any business being, you know, for the few $100 or whatever it costs. But the EF lenses are already softer than the RF lenses. And I lose too much detail, I feel, when I have the speed booster, you know, and then the EF lens in front of it. And so I'll have, like, for instance, my real estate setup with the Komodo-X is the Laowa 12 millimeter 0D EF mount with the regular adapter. I might get the RF version that's the Cine lens RF version, so it has the longer focus throw and stuff. But I've really been liking that lens lately, and the Komodo-X has enough resolution to punch through what otherwise is not a great lens, like optically. It is very well corrected for distortions, which is handy because on the Komodo you have no software profiles to be able to, you know, straighten edges and things like that. But it's not a particularly sharp lens, and I'm usually using it like wide open or close to as well, you know. So anything you can do to increase sharpness on that lens is good. The Komodo-X shooting 6K and then downscaling that for a 4K delivery, that solves that. You know, it becomes a sharper lens when you put it in that environment. It would not be that, it would not have that same quality if I was using the speed booster with it as well. So to answer your question, yeah, I have EF. I have the EF 50, the L, the 1.2. I've got the 24 millimeter L. I've got the 18 to 35. I've got the Laowa. I think that's it. I had the 16 to 35 f4. I traded it, you know, for some things because I'd gotten into using the Laowa, you know, Commando without the speed booster there. Let's see. I was tempted to sell my Komodo OGs. I still think the Komodo OGs are the best value. I take that back. If Blackmagic didn't exist, which they do, right? I think the Komodo OGs would be the best value in the camera world. But it is really hard to ignore that the Blackmagic cameras are so good and so cheap, you know? But I really like the OG Komodo. I really like the OG Komodo. The thing that I like so much about the OG Komodo over the KX, because most things in the KX are better. I mean, it's, you know, let's not pull any punches here. It's a better camera. I really like the hot swappable BP battery setup on the OG. because it makes the whole thing smaller than the KX. They are hot swappable, and the camera doesn't draw so much power that they won't still last a long time, you know. And there are other solutions too about like power monitors and things like that. But I really like the form. I mean, you know, the form factor of the Komodos. It's supposed to be tiny, and it is. And I think the OG is the pinnacle of that. You know, it's a really tiny camera, and you know, you can hot swap them and stuff. And so like, I really liked my OG. You know, kind of wish I hadn't sold it. Still have your monster? Do you still have your monster, Carlos? I know you recently got a Raptor. So thought about it. I can't make some money with by selling half a day's worth of work. But I thought about it, and I can make the same money I would take by selling in half a day's worth of work. Exactly. You know, and if it's still, you know, I mean, unless it has like, you know, 8 bazillion hours on it and you're having trouble with it and such, and it's become more of a pain in the ass to keep it, then I would keep it just for that reason. You know, if it's a working tool for you, why get rid of it? You know, I'm thinking more like that these days. You know, I'm not so quick to run out and jump out and, you know, and buy the latest, greatest thing. Now, that is detrimental for somebody who is on YouTube talking about cameras, you know, because the traction is around the new ones. But yeah, you know, so you did get rid of your Monstro. I still kind of miss my Dragon X. I'm going to admit it. I really liked that camera. You know, I kind of wish I hadn't gotten rid of that one too. See, like I would have all the things, man. Like that's the problem, you know. I would have all the things. La Cucaracha should be in everyone's lens lineup. I think it is, isn't it? Doesn't everybody have a La Cucaracha? But I agree. I mean, this lens is so crazy good for. It's like $600 or something like that, you know. And it routinely, like, if you see this lens like compared against other ones, it continually throttles things that are like several times its price, you know. It's like, whatever Sigma did, do more of that, you know, more La Cucarachas. So I would look to your monster. Excellent carrier gear. He does take excellent care of his gear. Speaking of shooting wide open, this is the exact reason why I'm not interested in the new Cooke for mirrorless lenses. Your thoughts? Really? Do they have a problem shooting wide open? I thought they looked certainly interesting. Were they like 4,000, 5,000 a piece or something like that? What's your concern with them wide open? I didn't know there was any kind of issue there. With the fast RF glass as sharp as it is, I don't see the allure of more expensive lenses. I think the allure of more expensive lenses a lot of times is because they impart some type of character to the image. But you know, the fast RF lenses are stills lenses, and you know, and I just the methodology is just different. You know, like stills lenses are going to be sharper than cine lenses. Almost every single one of them. You know, and it's just because that's what stills photography is after. You know, is sharp, accurate portrayals of what's in front of them, whereas cine lenses are kind of made to a mood, you know. And of course you have ones like, you know, like the RE Master Primes, which are Zeiss lenses, and you know, these are the best things that, you know, that we can make, you know, kind of thing. And but most of them aren't that, and so anything under that $20,000-$30,000 per you know, lens territory, it has a look, you know, and a lot of the times that look is tuned to be what it is, you know, from the manufacturer. And so I don't balk at more expensive lenses than RF stills lenses. I just look at them as different coloring tools, you know, tools to color your image a different way. And some of those ways are very expensive to get into, you know. No doubt Blackmagic pocket cameras punch above their weight class, but IR pollution, plastic fragile, and fixed pattern noise. So about the IR pollution, I actually learned recently, and I don't know how effective this is, that the full frame sensor one that they just did allegedly has an IR filter in front of the sensor. And so it does not have the ND that like and that's probably because the L mount is shallower, right? But apparently it does better in IR. I don't know if that's true. Fixed pattern noise totally get it. Apparently the older sensor, like the OG 6K and stuff, is better for that. Everybody who's been testing these things against the new full frame one says that the full frame one is noisier. For my purposes, and this is, again, I mean, this is like what we're talking about. Like, all these cameras are like, you know, what is your specific use case? For my use case, that wouldn't really matter, because if I use a Pocket 6K, it is going to be in an environment that I'm not really struggling for light. You know, so I'm not super concerned about fixed pattern noise. They're plastic. And it's plastic football. None of us want it yet. You know, that's what they keep giving us, right? I work with VFX footage, rotoscoping, and high sharp detail is a must for me. I can see the use of Otis or other sharp lenses from the past. Yeah. But, you know, like the, what is it? The RF50? I call it the world's crappiest 50. I hate the RF50, the 1.2. I don't like it. You know, it's optically though, it's awesome. It's like Otis territory optically. It just doesn't focus on anything for anything. You know, so I got rid of that. I call it the world's crappiest 50. Yeah, Otises are great. You know, they don't autofocus at all. So I don't miss the price of the mini mags. Yeah, you and I have talked about that. I once paid $1,850 for a 980 gig. It was a weird income. 980 gig, I think it is, mini mag used, because the new ones are like 2,700 or something like that. Crazy. You know, CA is horrible on those. Oh, is it? Oh, that's why you can't use it wide open, because you get all the chromatic aberration and the fringing on it. That's interesting. I didn't know that about them. I haven't seen a whole lot about them. You know, I mean, again, like, horses for courses and use cases, I don't typically shoot a lot of lenses wide open anyway. So if the chromatic aberration gets better, if you stop down a little bit, I might still be interested if they have a really nice look to them, you know. Blackmagic, Cinema, whatever the hell, and the other iterations have such an odd shape for my taste. Yeah, the plastic football. Well, yeah, what is this new one? The BMC C6K, the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K, which is like, I don't know, I mean, all these acronyms. Those are abbreviations. Josh loves the RF50. No, he don't. He can't, you know. So yeah, so in case anybody was interested, my RF50 went to Josh Satin, and you know, he's been using it. I tease him about it all the time. He knows how much I hate it. He knew how much I hated it before he bought it from me, before he traded. I forget what that deal was. I think the R3 was part of that, coming back to me again. But yeah, so how's the world's crappiest 50? You know, I hate that lens. So anyway, all right, I gotta go, y'all. Hour and 37. Thanks for tagging along. And yeah, what do you think about my new mic? So you didn't see Carlos, but a very good friend of mine gave me this mic for Christmas, and it was awesome, you know, to do that. And I don't know if I quite like it as much on my voice as the KU5A, but the reason I was looking at this mic to begin with was on a kick drum, because they're really cool on kick drums. And I've got a little rad little DW 18x12, like a little you know, progressive jazz size kick drum, and I think this will be just whoa on it. So anyway, so yeah, got a new mic. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining, and I will see you soon. I'm going to be more active this year. That's one of my resolutions. I'll talk about that in one of those videos.